Hi everyone, this is Daniel Gregg speaking, and I'm going to make another video for you today. The title of this video is Josephus and the Prophet of Bethel. The year is 6162 of the world. The date is the 10th of Elul, and on the Gregorian calendar, that's the 27th of August, 2023. Okay, so Josephus mentions a prophet which he calls Jadon, Jodon, but which undoubtedly was pronounced Yadon after the Hebrew. And by this, he means the prophet of Bethel. Okay, so we're going to figure out what Josephus says about the prophet of Bethel here. And I'm going to read you from Antiquities. The reference is Antiquities 10, section 67. Okay, so we're going to look in book 10. All right, book 10. Section 67. All right. Get real interesting here. Here we go. Section 67, Josephus. And he's talking about the reign of Jeroboam here. No, he's talking about the reign of Josiah. So let's skip back to book 10, section 57. He's speaking about Josiah. He says, "But when he was now in the 18th year of his reign, he sent Eliakim the high priest and gave order that out of what money was overplus he should cast cups, dishes, and vials for the ministration in the temple," and so on and so on. So this is related in the book of Chronicles besides Josephus, and I think it's also related in the book of Kings. Okay, so Josiah had this great Passover reformation in his 18th year. Okay, so, and in that same year, Josiah cleansed the land of the priests of Baal that Jeroboam had installed. Okay, and he says in section 67, all right, so I'm going to skip back one section here to 66. Okay, it's talking about Josiah's purge of all the Baal worshippers in Israel and their priesthood. "And when he had done thus in Jerusalem, he came into the country and utterly destroyed what buildings had been made therein by King Jeroboam in honor of strange gods, and he burnt the bones of the false prophets upon that altar which Jeroboam first built. And as the prophet Jadon, which is the name he gives to the prophet of Bethel, although we really don't know that that was his name, Yadon. Okay, but that's what Josephus thinks it was. And as the prophet Yadon, who came to Jeroboam when he was offering sacrifice, and when all the people heard him, foretold what would come to pass, that a certain man of the house of David, Josiah by name, should do what is here mentioned. And it happened that those predictions took effect after 361 years. So Josephus tells us that it was the 361st year since the prophet Yadon had prophesied. Okay, so who is this prophet of Bethel? Let's look this passage up in 1 Kings chapter 13 and find out who this Yadon is. All right, so here I have 1 Kings 13. 1 Kings 13:1 from the English Standard Version. "And behold, a man of God came out of Judah by the word of the Lord to Bethel. Jeroboam was standing by the altar to make offerings, and the man cried out against the altar by the word of the Lord, and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name. And he shall sacrifice on you the priests of the high places who make offerings on you, and human bones shall be burned. And human bones shall be burned on you. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, This is the sign that Yahweh has spoken. Behold, the altar shall be torn down, and the ashes that are on it shall be poured out. And when the king heard the saying of the man of God, which he cried against the altar at Bethel, Jeroboam stretched out his hand from the altar, saying, Seize him. And his hand, which he had stretched out against him, dried up, so that he could not draw it back to himself. The altar also was torn down, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign that the man of God had given by the word of Yud-He-Wav-He. Okay, and then you can read the rest of the story here. It's very interesting. This takes place in the first year of Jeroboam when he introduced idolatry into Israel. Okay, so if you have a current edition of my chronology, you'll notice that I have placed this event a little bit earlier than it is in the current chronology. The reasons for this have to do with a deep study of Hebrew tenses, which I have learned since I put that date in there. It's not that important to the overall result. What's important is that pretty much every chronologer considers it to be the case as the first year. Okay, so now we know who this prophet of Bethel is, this Jadon, as Josephus comes from. And he gives us a date of 361 years in the 18th year of Josiah. Okay, so let's see, I got all the background information here. Yep. So where does Josephus get 361 years from? How does he come up with this number? Okay, let's start with the death of Josiah. All right. Josiah was killed by Pharaoh Necho II in his 31st and last year, when the new Pharaoh was on his way to help the Assyrians drive the Babylonians out of Haran. Okay, so according to the Babylonian Chronicle, and that would be BM 21901, which stands for British Museum Tablet, or sometimes Tablet Series, but British Museum 21901, according to the Babylonian Chronicle here, the Babylonians overthrew Haran in the 16th year of Nabopolassar, in the month of Heshwan. Now the tablet I think says Mar Heshwan, but I'm giving you a more biblical equivalent, or actually a more understandable to the modern audience. Heshwan, the 8th month, in the year 610 BC. So that's when the Babylonians overthrew Haran and occupied the city, and they garrisoned it. Okay, and there's a famous inscription from a high priestess of Haran too that gives the same year as the 16th year of Nabopolassar. Okay, so this was after the beginning of Josiah's regnal year on Tishri 1 year, that year. That's important that it's the 8th month. Okay, in the same regnal year, the Assyrians, with the help of Egypt, tried to recapture the city in the 17th year of Nabopolassar during the 4th, 5th, and 6th months of the year. Okay, this is according to the same tablet. Okay, and remember, we've dated the Neo-Babylonian chronology absolutely. I've shown you some of the astronomical dating for that. Okay, so we know absolutely that this year is 609 BC during the 4th, 5th, and 6th months. That would be late summer, okay, before the 7th month. Okay, it was at the beginning of this joint Egyptian-Assyrian counterattack against Babylon that Josiah marched out to oppose the Egyptians, who were advancing to assist the Assyrians. So the Assyrian Empire was crumbling, and it was becoming a lesser power, and Egypt allied with Assyria in support of Assyria against the Babylonians. Okay, so when Necho met Josiah, and Josiah marched out to oppose him, he had him shot in a brief skirmish, and that was the death of Josiah. In his 31st year, in the year 609 BC. So Josiah was killed between the 8th month of 610 and the 4th month of 609, because we don't know precisely how long before the Assyrians and the Egyptians engaged the Babylonians that Josiah was killed. But we know for certain that it was after the Babylonians took the city and occupied it. Okay, the city of Haran. Okay, so the most likely time for the death of Josiah is during the first 3 months of 609, which would be Nisan, Iyar, or Sivan. So this was during his 31st year. And since Judah used a Tishri year, this was 610.T/609.T. Okay? So we have the following equation. 610.T/609.T equals the 31st year of Josiah. So I posted that up on the screen. And what this 2-year notation means is the year that began on Tishri 1 in 610 and ended on Tishri, or ended by Tishri 1 on the last day of Elul in 609. Okay, so that's the 31st year of Josiah. Okay, this is the normally accepted date by scholars. No surprise here. Okay, since they're considering the evidence I've shown you before that backs this up, and they've seen the same evidence and they agree. Okay, so now we may compute the 18th year of Josiah going backward in time. Okay, this 18th year is mentioned not just in Josephus as the timing of this Jadon prophecy being fulfilled, a prophet of Bethel, but it's also mentioned in Scripture, okay, in the books of Chronicles and Kings. Okay, so we need to go backward in time 13 years, okay? So we take our equation and we add 13 years to the left-hand side and subtract 13 from the other side, because we're going backward in time, and you have to add the BC years in order to go backward in time, so that's why it's plus on one side and minus on the other. This kind of notation I invented to give error-free counting of endpoints, which is very important in chronology when you're inclusively counting, to have error-free counting. Okay, so that's how the notation works. So if we add 13 years, we get 623.Tishri, that's 623 BC, to 622 Tishri. And that's the 18th year of Josiah. So 31 minus 13 is 18. So borrow from the 3, a 1, that becomes a 2. So you have 11 minus 3 equals 8, and 2 minus 1 is 1. Okay, so this stuff is purely logical. Okay, so once again, the scholars, the norm among scholars is to agree that this is the 18th year. So I'm not telling you anything new or unusual here. Okay, so Josephus has given us the equation that the 18th year of Josiah equals the 361st year since the prophecy of Jadon, the prophet of Bethel. Let's see where Josephus started counting from. So to do this, we have to go backward 360 years. All right. So 361 Jadon equals 623.T/622.T equals 18 Josiah. So to find the first year of this era, we have to subtract 360 from one side and add 360 to the other. So we get 1 Jadon, or the first year of this era, as 983.Tishri to 982.Tishri. Okay, so you should recognize these dates from some of our previous video. This means that Josephus has been started counting from the first year of the divided kingdom. That's where his counting goes back to when we do this. Okay, with year 1 in 982 BC. Why did Josephus do this? Let's see what happens if we run this era out another 29 years. So let's start with the equation 361 Jaden equals 623.Tishri slash 622.Tishri. And we're going to add 29 years to the left side, and we're going to subtract 29 years from the right side. We get 390 Jaden, the 390th year, equals 594 Tishri slash 593.Tishri. What is special about this year, 593? Well, I've talked about it in several videos in conjunction to their Jubilee dating and our astronomical dating. The year 593 BC is the 5th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, when the great passage of Ezekiel chapters 1 through 4 was given to Ezekiel when he saw his visions of God, and he was told to lie on one side 390 years for the sin of Israel and 40 years on the other side for the sin of Judah. Okay, so that's the special point about this passage. In the same passage, Ezekiel gives a sum of 30 years. Okay, so what does the 30 years mean? Ezekiel 1:1. Okay, perhaps I should read you Ezekiel, that passage, Ezekiel 1:1. He says, in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, I was among the exiles by the river Chebar, by the Chebar Canal. The heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim, the word of Yahweh came to Ezekiel the priest, son of Buz, in the land of Chaldeans, by the Chebar Canal, and the hand of Yahweh was upon him there. So he relates the vision, okay, and it's pretty much without a break here. We come to chapter 4, where it says, and I'm going to have to correct the translation here, but it says, and you, son of man, take a brick and lay it before you, and engrave on it a city, even Jerusalem, and put siege works against it, and build a siege wall against it, and cast up a mound against it, set camps also against it, and plant battering rams against it, all around you. And you, take an iron griddle, and place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and set your face toward it. And let it be in a state of siege, and press the siege against it. This is the sign for the house of Israel. Okay. Then lie on your left side, and I give you the iniquity of the house of Israel. According to the number of days, you shall lie on it. You shall bear their iniquity. For I assigned you a number of days, 390 days, equal to the number of years of their iniquity. And likewise for Judah, he said, you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah, 40 days I assign you, a day for each year. Okay, so this was given in the 5th year of the exile, the year 593. Okay, so now we were going to discuss what the 30 years means. Okay, he says in the 30th year. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a little computation here. All right, well, that's on the next page. All right, so I skipped over something, and I'm going to have a drink of water and restart the camera. Okay, I wanted to include a little bit of background here. Now, I read Ezekiel 4, 5, and 6. What I want to read now is I want to read 1 Kings chapter 12, which is immediately before the Jadon prophecy, the prophet of Bethel. So remember that we don't know that that's really his name. Should probably refer to him as the prophet of Bethel. Okay. Chapter 12, verses 18 and 19. Okay, so when the kingdom split, Rehoboam and Jeroboam and the people had this little negotiation, which basically was about taxation. And Jeroboam rejected their pleas for leniency, and so this is what happened after that. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was taskmaster over the forced labor, and all Israel stoned him to death with stones. And King Rehoboam hurried to mount his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. So this word rebellion in Hebrew is the Hebrew word pesha, which means transgression, and it's actually a synonym of the word avon, which means iniquity. Okay, so from Judah's point of view, the iniquity of Israel began with this pesha, this transgression against the tribe of Judah, and stoning the taskmaster. Okay, but the rebellion came about by the word of Yahweh, and it's also, this year is also matched up with the 390 years that we're talking about, because it's the era of the divided kingdom, which is one of the ways of interpreting the sin of Israel. Okay, it's the way that's most commonly recognized. Now, I've discussed in some videos years ago about the other way of doing it, and that is still the case, but I'm not going to cover that right now. We're going to cover this interpretation of the 390 years. Okay, so 390 years of the transgression of Israel against Judah here, okay? And that starts in the first year of Jeroboam, and it continues to the 5th year of the exile. All right, so now we're going to figure out the 30 years here that we read about in Ezekiel chapter 1. Okay, so Ezekiel chapter 1 is placed within the Tishri year 594.t/593.t. So that's equal to the 30th year. That's our equation. So to find out where this era starts counting from, we have to subtract 29 years from the 30 and add 29 years to the BC date. So we come up with, after we do this addition here, which I've put on the screen, 623.Tishri/622.Tishri equals the first year. And if you recognize that, that's equal to the year of the 18th year of Josiah. So this era in Ezekiel is being counted from the 18th year of Josiah. Okay, which again is the 361st year that Josephus mentions in his Antiquities. So it is apparent that Ezekiel kept an era from this year, since it was the year of Josiah's great Passover Reformation. All right, so now we see that the 390-year era is implicit in Josephus by calculating backwards and forwards to see where his starting point and his ending point are. Okay, so we can check this calculation with a back of the envelope summation of the kings of Judah. So that's what we're going to do, keeping several things in mind as we do this back of the envelope calculation. Back of the envelope means just an estimate, because we know for certain reasons that it's not going to be perfectly accurate. Sometimes the prophets counted the last year of a king as the first year of a new king, so that can lead to inaccuracy in the summation. Sometimes they counted it separate. There are definite reasons for each method. As we know of a 12-year regency between Amaziah and Uzziah, where there was no king, just unnamed regents. And finally, we know that 3 years of Jehoram of Judah overlapped with his father Jehoshaphat. So keeping those things in mind, here's a summary. Okay, so I'm putting it up on the screen. All right, and we see that the divided kingdom starts with Rehoboam, and then the kings are Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Ahaziah, and so on. I've listed all the kings here of Judah in their biblical order, and I put their reign lengths according to Scripture down to next each one. Rehoboam 17, Abijah 3, and so on, as stated in Scripture. Okay, where it says Jehoahaz, that's a quarter year, that's actually 3 months. Okay, but I made it a quarter year. The total is 387 and a half years. Okay, so that's awfully close to 390 with just the back of the envelope calculation. And the reason it's not exactly dead set on is because of the 3 reasons I just mentioned. Double counting of the last year, non-inclusive counting, actually number 1, I'll put those up on the screen. Exclusive or inclusive count between reigns. That could lead to an inaccuracy. A 12-year regency and 3 years counted in the Jehoshaphat, Jehoram co-regency. Okay, so those are the reasons why it's 387 and a half from the back of the envelope adding up and not exactly 390. Okay, so before any adjustments are made due to the 3 factors. Okay, so now we're going to apply our adjustments here and see what we find out. Okay, the quarter year for the reign of Jehoiakim. Okay, so that's next. That's the last one on the list. Okay, or before the exile. Okay, the quarter year for Jehoiakim is in the same year as Jehoiakim's 11th year, 598.t/597.t. Okay, so now Jehoiakim and Jehoiakim have very similar names. Okay, so you have to learn to tell the difference between the two, but they're on the list here and they have a slightly different spelling. You can see that. The quarter year for Jehoahaz, okay, so that's the quarter year before, is for the same 3 months, months 4, 5, and 6, that Egypt and Assyria were trying to recapture Haran in 609 BC. And in the reign year ended in 609 Tishri. Okay, so it is clear that Necho returned to Judah after his failure at Haran and deposed Jehoahaz and took him to Egypt, where he died. So he was appointed. Okay, I think I skipped along here. Yeah, I skipped a line here. He took him to Egypt, where he died. The prophets clearly counted the year 609 Tishri/608 Tishri, which is the next regnal year, as the accession year of Jehoiakim. So Jehoiakim was appointed after 609 Tishri. And the deposed king Jehoahaz's throne was left vacant until Necho figured out what to do with Judea. Maybe not very long, but long enough to go over the regnal year. So this year was counted only as an accession year without any other reign year attached to it. Okay? So the result of these 2 factors is that the 0.25 years should be left out of the calculation in both cases, and that 1 more year of regency, this time Necho, should be reckoned. So a total of 387 years and 13 years of regency, because no one claims the accession year of Jehoiakim with enumerated reign year. It's just an accession year. So that's another year of regency. We can assign that to Necho. Okay, so 13 years of regency were not counted, and 3 years of co-regency were double counted. This leaves a net of 10 years not counted. Okay, but 387 years is 3 years short. of 390. So we need, do the subtraction, 10 minus 3 is 7 years of inclusive counting to balance the years not counted. So this is story problem reasoning, so you've got to follow the logic, okay? But we need 7 years of inclusive counting to balance. This implies there are 7 cases of inclusive counting in the line of Judah. And these are, I'll give you a list of them here. Asa to Jehoshaphat, number 1. Number 2, Jehoram to Ahaziah. Number 3, Ahaziah to Athaliah. Number 4, Uzziah to Jotam. Number 5, Ahaz to Hezekiah. Number 6, Hezekiah to Manasseh. And the 7th inclusive counting would be Jehoiakim's short 3-month reign and the first year of exile are counted in the same Tishri year. Okay, so that leads us, when we do that, to exactly 390 years when we make those adjustments. When we make those 7 transitions inclusive and the rest of the transitions exclusive, we get 390 years, and we have to include 12-year regency between Amaziah and Uzziah, and 1 year of regency between Jehoahaz and Jehoiakim, taken up by Necho's dilly-dallying, probably. All right. Additional factors leading to exactly 390 years. Number 1, due to constant inclusive counting in the parallel kingdom of Israel. Okay, at the beginning part of it, the first possible place to inclusively count in Judah is at the Asa-Jehoshaphat transition. A sabbatical year fixes the 3rd year of Jehoshaphat and thus the inclusive count. But if this is overlooked, then as a consequence, Jehoshaphat gets an accession year, and there will be 4 years of co-regency with Jehoram of Judah rather than 3. So this uncertainty cancels itself out, either way, with a net 0 possibility of change in the overall result. Okay, number 2. The year 894.Tishri/893.Tishri, the 90th year of the divided kingdom, was a momentous year. 3 kings, or shepherds, as Scripture puts it, were removed from the thrones of Judah and Israel in 1 month, breaking the union between Judah and Israel. And two of these kings were killed by Jehu. Athaliah is not given years of reign, but she usurped the throne 6 years, so no accession year is used. But to calculate, we should count using a Tishri year inclusively, and the 7th year for Athaliah's usurpation is the same as the 1st year of Joash. But since I only counted the usurpation at 6 years and not 7, there is no inclusive count with Joash. Number 3. Due to the fact that I by default use an accession year with a father-to-son transition, that is, unless proved otherwise, Amaziah and Jeroboam II each begin with an accession year. Uzziah begins with 1 after a regency and is installed on Tishri 1, which is you expect, 16 years of age. Okay, 4. There is a known co-regency between Uzziah and Jotam, but as usual, the years of co-regency are not counted. However, because there was a co-regency, the last year of Uzziah is Jotham's first. That's my rule for every unenumerated co-regency, and I believe it was the prophet's rule also. This is discussed more on this section in this volume 2 of the Scroll of Biblical Chronology and Ancient Near Eastern History. 6. Due to synchronisms with Israel, it is clear that Hezekiah ruled with a co-regency, and the count is inclusive by the rule I just stated. Number 7. Manasseh ruled with an inclusive count, Due to the predicted extra 15 years of Hezekiah, he was installed in the 15th year at the age of 12. This is also secured by the prophecy of Isaiah 7:8 and the prophet Ezekiel. Okay, the general comment here, I have experimented with every possible combination of inclusive and non-inclusive count that you can imagine. I've made binary trees, going through plus minus years on each possible choice that one can make for every possible chronology possible. Okay, so the chronology can contract, or just on that alone, on the inclusive account, it can expand or contract by 6 years. Okay, so I did this in an attempt to pull the sum off of 390 years. Okay, but every case results in inconsistent rules and a chronology less parsimonious with the facts. In other words, all the solutions I've given, except the one that I've given in the book, is less parsimonious. It doesn't meet Occam's razor. I did this on and off going all the way back to the 1980s, okay, using just about every generation of computer that came on the market to simplify the work. All right, Josephus. So now we're going to discuss Josephus's numbers here, okay? Josephus will confirm for us the duration of the 390-year period by his other numbers, just to show you that this 361 is not a fluke. In Antiquities 10.147, okay, so let's look that up. In Antiquities 10, section 147. Let's pause the video. Okay, we're in book 10 here. Good. Okay. And I lost my place on the page here. Okay, 10.147. Going this way. Here we go. He says, now the temple was burned 470 years, 6 months and 10 days after it was built. Okay, so that's his number, 470 years. And we're going to just round off those months and days there because they're inaccurate. Okay, that's another scholarly issue. Okay, so in order to understand his number, we have to understand that Josephus supplies 80 years for the reign of Solomon. Shocker. Antiquities, Book 8, Section 211. When we go back here to the 8th book and Section 211, he says, Solomon died when he was already an old man, having reigned 80 years and lived 94. Okay, so he gives 80 years. Now, of course, we know the biblical number is 40 years. So why does Josephus assign 80 years to Solomon? Okay. So the reason he exceeds the biblical number of 40 years by 40 years is that he hypothesized that the 40 years of the sin of Judah were 40 years. Okay? This is the only reason that can reasonably be guessed for the extra 40 years. It is not a scribe error in Josephus because Josephus's 80 years are built into his summation of numbers in several places. Okay, it's not a scribe error. Since it's not a scribe error, a rational reason must be sought for the extra 40 years. In other words, Josephus had a reason for it. Even if there is another rational reason than the one I stated, the numerical result, okay, the one I stated, the numerical results are the same, okay? We need only understand that Josephus intended 80 years. In other words, it's not just a mistake. We do not have to be absolutely right about the reason. Nevertheless, the reason that fits Occam's razor best is to suppose that he wanted to explain the 40 years for the sins of Judah. Okay, so there's a little rationale behind this. It was the sins of idolatry that Jeroboam introduced during his reign that caused the house of Israel to stumble into sin with the house of Judah. And so the explanation of this is that Judah sinned alone for 40 years before Israel did. This was the explanation current in Josephus' time, or the one he came up with. Okay, however, it's put in the wrong place. If you see in my chronology, you will see where these 40 years actually go. And there was a later Jewish theory in Seder Olam that puts the years in the correct place also. So the biblical number of 40 years is actually correct. We just need to understand the reason why Josephus made it 80 years, and this is the reason. Okay, so now that we know this, it allows us to decompose Josephus's total of 470 years and discovered how he viewed the matter of the divided kingdom. So it is as follows. The individual sum of the divided kingdom to the 5th year of the exile before our adjustments, as we have seen, was 387 years. There were 36 years left to Solomon's first 40 years, after which, because the temple was begun in the 4th year, so now we're going to count the remaining 36 years of this 40-year period. There were 36 years left to Solomon's first 40 years, after which Josephus puts another 40. Okay, so Josephus understands the 5th year of Jehoiakim's exile to be the 4th year of Zedekiah. This leaves 7 years to complete Zedekiah's 11 years to the destruction of the temple. So here's the sum. 36 years left after the 4th year of Solomon, 40 for the sin of Judah, 387 for the summation of the divided kingdom, and 7 remain to Zedekiah. You add those figures up, and you get 470. 7 and 7 is 14, and 6 is 20. Put the 0 down, carry the 2. 2 and 8 is 10, plus 7 is 17, carry the 1, and 470. Okay. But Josephus later corrected his 470-year figure to 466 years. Well, that sounds familiar. He later corrected it. But as we will see, the correction agrees with the parsimonious explanation I'm giving here. And actually even makes our case stronger. This we see in Antiquities, Book 20, Section 232. So written later, flip over here to Book 20, Section 232. Really close to the end here, where he's talking about the high priest. And he says, all right, let's start in section 231. After those 13 high priests, 18 took the high priesthood at Jerusalem, one in succession to another from the days of King Solomon until Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, made an expedition against the city and burnt the temple and removed our nation into Babylon, and then took Josedek, the high priest, captive. The times of these priests were 466 years, 6 months, and 10 days, while the Jews were still under the regal government. So again, I'm going to drop off the months and the days, and the reason is because they're mistakes. All right. Scribes couldn't tamper with the whole number part of it because they're baked into Josephus' numbers. Okay. Alrighty. So that's 466 years. So how does Josephus get this number? Well, you should notice that he's timing it by the priest serving in the temple here. Okay. And we know that it took Solomon 7 years to build the temple, and it was finished in the 8th month in the month of Dol, the 8th month. Okay, and they did it dedicate the temple and install the priesthood until the beginning of Solomon's 12th year. So Josephus is concealing his mistake by counting from when the priests were installed in the temple and not when it was built. Okay, so that's from the 12th year through the 40th year of Solomon, and then, of course, an extra 40 years for Josephus's 80 years. Okay, so that's 29 years left after the 11th year of Solomon, 40 for the sin of Israel, and now this time he uses the actual sum of 390 years. Actual sum of the sin of Israel. And again, 7 years remain to Zedekiah. So when you add these numbers up, you get 466. So this is Josephus's correction, and it's the most parsimonious explanation. Okay, now that the 470 and 466 comes with, I mentioned this before, comes with months and days, but clearly these numbers have been corrupted by scribes, as is the date of the burning of the temple in Antiquities, Book 10, Section 146. If we look in Book 10, to show you how I can so easily dismiss the months and days off the end of this. Section 146, Book 10, Section 146, it says, talking about the destruction by Nebuchadnezzar. When he had carried these off, he set fire to the temple in the 5th month on the 1st day of the month in the 11th year of the reign of Zedekiah, and in the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. Of course, we know that the correct number there is the 10th day of the 5th month, the 10th of Av, okay, according to the book of Jeremiah, or as tradition would state it, the 9th of the Av, okay. So maybe the fire was set on the 9th and continued to burn for up to the 10th, or even set earlier and continued to burn the most on the 9th and 10th. Okay, so as I said, the whole number wasn't corrupted, but the months and days are corruptible, and the reason it has to do is because scholars are trying to second guess Josephus on the epoch he's using for a year here. That's part of the reason. Okay, so our conclusion. So once again, using the correct biblical chronology, it is a simple matter to reverse engineer Josephus and show both where his mistakes were and that when corrected, his numbers add up to the correct biblical chronology. Alrighty, so the 7 years remaining to Zedekiah. Let's explain why Josephus is using that number. Implies a temple destruction date in 586 BC. But as we know, it was in 587 BC. Okay, so the 40 years of the sin of Judah are misplaced. Okay, so that's the 2 mistakes in Josephus. So now I'm going to give the proper sum, what Josephus should have calculated. 29 years for the 12th to 40th year of Solomon. Okay, and not putting any sin of Judah here, going straight to the 390 years, and 6 years remaining for Zedekiah. Total of 425 years. That's a number that Josephus should have had, but didn't have. Okay, so we know the temple was burned in 587. Okay, that would be the year 588.t/587.t, and we set that equal to 424. And okay, that should be set equal to pause, cut. All right, starting up again here. Okay, so I caught a typo in the script. All right, 588.tshri/587.tshri is what I'm talking about. That's equal to the 425th year that Josephus should have counted. Okay, so we add 424 to the left side of the equation and subtract 424 from the right side. And we will end up with year 1 of the era, the 12th year of Solomon, in 1012.t/1011.t. Okay, and that is exactly as this year is in the scroll of biblical chronology and ancient Near Eastern history, without the extra 40 years in the reign of Solomon. All right. Which is to say, Josephus's chronology, once you fix the errors, which were obvious, and we know why he intended the 40 years, and we know how he ended up with 7 years instead of 6. 587b is now the accepted date, and actually you can figure that out from internals of biblical chronology also. And 586b was an error that was long established, and this is in many reference books out there, unfortunately. Okay, so I have to confess making a mistake in my last video. The mistake is, ta-da, I believe I said that Wars was written after Antiquities. And actually, Josephus's Wars was written before Antiquities. Okay? So the correction does not change any of the conclusions. All right. So I think I've demonstrated ably here what Josephus understood the divided kingdom to be. The length, it agrees with the 390 years in Ezekiel. And he gives a synchronism date in the 18th year of Josiah. He correctly explains the 30 years. That agrees with what I have in my chronology. And also agrees with although Josephus didn't have the precise knowledge from the Neo-Babylonian astronomical synchronisms, so he wouldn't have known in the exact amount of time that passed since his time. He just had the works in the Library of Alexandria, and actually it's possible that he only got that knowledge later as he was finishing up his writing his books. All right, thank you for listening. Daniel Gregg, over and out.